Hello, I'm Jamie Killian, the Carnes and Wilson County biologist, and I'd like to introduce you today to the 4 ecological regions that occur in Bexar County or the surrounding counties. I will also describe how they looked historically, how they might look today, and what maintain those, and things you can do to maintain and manage your habitat today. So my goals with this presentation are for you to be able to determine which ecological region your property is in so that you can begin your management process. Texas is a large state and we do have several ecoregions, 11. There are 4 that are in this area, so the counties, including and surrounding Bexar County, comprise 4 ecological regions. What determines an ecoregion is the abiotic and biotic factors. The abiotic factors are the non-living, and they can determine and influence the biotic factors. So things like soil, rainfall, and temperature are the abiotic factors, and those influence the biotic factors like the plants and animals that occur within those ecoregions. And humans are also an influence on the ecoregions. This is a really neat and unique part of the state. This is the only location where we do have 4 ecoregions converging. So this is kind of a neat part of the state to be in, but it can also push your limits of knowledge. So just to help you get started, I have listed the ecoregions and which counties fall within those ecoregions. And you'll notice that some counties can fall or have more than one ecoregion. So there's several ways for you to determine which ecoregion your property is within. And you can use resources available from Texas Parks and Wildlife. Our website has maps and other things that will help you determine which ecoregion you're in. You can also use the Natural Resource Conservation Service website with the Web Soil Survey. The appraisal districts oftentimes already have which ecoregion your county is within. You can use climate data or just observe the plants on your property. The plants will tell you a lot. But there is some overlap. So there's several resources for you to determine that, but by the end of this presentation, hopefully you will know for sure where you're at. I'll start out talking about the South Texas Plains. This has an average annual rainfall of about 27 inches. It's a subtropical climate, so hot, humid summers and mild winters. Some of the common wildlife species that occur include white-tailed deer, Rio Grande turkey, northern bobwhite quail, Mexican free-tailed bats, and monarch butterflies. There are many more species, but these are just a few that I hear a lot when talking about the ag or wildlife valuation on the property. In this photograph, you see the tall stands of switchgrass behind me, and in the foreground, you see the short grasses. There's some side oats, grama, and windmill grass in that photograph, and then just scattered trees in the background. So this is what this may have looked like historically. This is what you might see more commonly nowadays in South Texas Plains. And a lot of the plant composition has shifted because of previous land use. So with the lack of fire and the introduction of exotic grasses, you are more likely to see something like in one of these photographs. So you see mesquite and huisache regrowth, as well as KR bluestem. Some other examples of previous land uses that can shift plant communities include ag production with improved hay meadows, row cropping, or ranching. So grazing pressure, and then removing grazing. Next, we'll talk about the Overgrazed Plateau, and this has a wider range of average annual rainfall. So as you move from east to west, in the east you start out with averages around 30 inches per year, and as you move west, that annual rainfall can drop to about 12 inches. And so that will definitely influence the plant communities that fall within that ecoregion. It's more of a subtropical steppe, so it has very hot summers and dry winters. Many of the common wildlife species are the same for each ecoregion: white-tailed deer, Rio Grande turkey, bobwhite quail. This ecoregion, however, has a few of the very rare species that we have in Texas: golden cheek warblers, black-capped vireos, as well as some karst species. So the Edwards Plateau includes some habitat that isn't found anywhere else in the world, and therefore you enjoy some very unique species in this ecoregion. You can see this, just the diversity of plant life in this photograph, this mix of medium and short grasses. This is what you would typically see in the Edwards Plateau or hill country. However, this is more commonly what the habitat might look like today. And some of the most common previous land uses that have shifted plant communities in the Edwards Plateau include overgrazing and the lack of fire. So you can see here almost devoid of native grasses and forbs, and quite a bit of ash juniper encroachment. So that has really altered the way things look today. One other influence that has had an impact on the plant communities has been the introduction of exotic ungulates. So particularly in the Edwards Plateau, we have high numbers of axis deer, blackbuck, and many other species. And these do compete with our native wildlife for resources. Next, the post oak savanna. This has an average annual rainfall of 45 to 35 inches. Like the Edwards Plateau, as you move from east to west and also north to south, you will see a decrease in average rainfall, typified with hot, humid summers and mild winters with an occasional cold spell. Same common wildlife species: white-tailed deer, Rio Grande turkey, bobwhite quail, monarch butterflies, and maybe several more species of bats utilizing this area as well. So it should be a savanna, but you will have scattered post oaks, as you see in this photograph. Nice tall grasses. This is what you would expect to see, and this is much more common today of what you would see in the previous land uses that kind of result in these types of habitats are overgrazing, lack of grazing, introduction of exotic grass species, and a lack of fire. Another big influence on how this habitat looks today is land fragmentation. So you see in these photographs lots of encroachment of, on the left picture is yacon, and on the right picture is eastern red cedar. So this really chokes out that open savanna habitat type. In the foreground on the photograph of the right, you do see what might be savanna, but it's actually grazed down pretty low, a mix of bahia and coastal Bermuda. So some exotic grasses have replaced those native grasses and poles. The Blackland Prairie is very similar to post oak savanna. It has an average rainfall of 40 to 30 inches. Again, as you move east to west and north to south, you see a decrease in the average rainfall, typified with hot, humid summers and mild winters with that occasional cold spell. So very, very nice tall grass prairie with some midgrasses mixed in. There would be a mix of scattered trees. And today this is more typical of what you might see. These are indicating overgrazing as well as an introduction of exotic grasses. Kind of hard to determine at this stage, but on the left-hand picture, the Johnson grass is the predominant grass. And on the right picture, it's grazed down so low you can see the rocks of the parent materials peeking through the vegetation there. Some of the other common land uses that have shifted these plant communities include agricultural production, row cropping, ranching, and then removal of grazing. So lack of grazing can be as detrimental as overgrazing. Grazing itself is not a bad practice, but how it's applied can really influence the impacts to the habitat and to plant communities. Also, you might see with the lack of grazing and lack of fire, rather than this open prairie, which is more similar to what it was historically, you might see thickets of cedar elm and hackberry growing back in. So the things that typically maintain the habitat would include the wildlife species that were present there at the time. So if you can envision massive herds of bison, sometimes even pronghorn antelope migrating through, moving through, grazing down everything, stirring up the soil with their hooves, fertilizing with all their feces, and then moving on. And that really, it allowed the habitat time to recover. It removed all the old rank vegetation so that new, fresh, palatable growth could come in. And also, the land was maintained very intentionally as well through fires. So fires were not just lightning strike fires, but they were set often and frequently by indigenous peoples. And the reasons, we can't be 100% sure, but it definitely opened up the prairie to make travel easier. They likely noticed with lightning strike fires, wildlife use. As soon as there was a flush of green growth, the use by wildlife increased, so they would notice that and want to take advantage of that. It also decreased tick populations, so there were many benefits to fire, and indigenous people did use that as a management tool. So when you're thinking of managing your property, you should think of what was there historically and try to mimic that practice and that effect. So all of those things fall under Aldo Leopold's tools, which are the axe, cow, plow, fire, and gun. And with those things, or something that imitates that, you can manage your property. You can use chainsaws, mulchers, herbicide, tractor and shredder, and rotational grazing. In some parts of the state, you can use disking, not necessarily in the South Texas plains. Fire and harvest of game species, as well as predator control. All of these things, when used, can manage and maintain your property. Depending on the stage that your property is in, whether it already looks like it did historically, or it's had some previous land use that need restoration efforts, that will determine how much or how active your management program should be. But in any case, with any management practice, I think any biologist here would tell you you will see most success in reaching your goals when using multiple tools to achieve that goal. So, for example, you would use rotational grazing coupled with herbicide and fire, or you might use predator control as well as native reseeding and planting to achieve a goal. And every management practice must be repeated. So you can't do shredding or fire one time and think that the effects will last into the future. So just as the migrating herds moved through an area repeatedly, our management efforts must reoccur annually. With that, I hope you can determine which ecoregion your property falls within. And if you still have questions, here's some resources to kind of look up and cement the thoughts that you have on which ecoregion you're in. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.